Bom, gente, bom dia. Eu vou falar em português, só para te apresentar. Bom dia, é um prazer hoje estar aqui, ter a presença da professora Judith. É uma fisioterapeuta muito conhecida, porque em 2008 ela fez uma das primeiras publicações, eu acho que eu posso considerar the first publication about a primeira publicação utilizando o I para a reabilitação de crianças com paralisia cerebral. Foi um estudo de caso na época, mas como foi em 2008, ele realmente foi muito famoso, foi a primeira tentativa de usar esses consoles eletrônicos que estava no início de utilização por pessoas com deficiência. Então, ela realmente teve esse paper que ficou muito conhecido. Então, mundialmente, a Judith ela é muito famosa, não só por esse paper, pelos trabalhos que vieram logo a seguir. Então, é um prazer muito grande a gente estar aqui. E aí eu sempre quis conhecer a Judith, conhecia pelos papers, lógico, mas eu sempre quis conhecer pessoalmente. Então, essa é uma oportunidade não só para a gente ouvir a Judith, mas também para a gente tentar ter uma relação de mais publicações, mais intercâmbios com a faculdade da Judith. Então, a Judith vai fazer uma apresentação sobre realidade virtual, utilização de tecnologia na reabilitação, e ela vai falar mais ou menos uns 40 minutos, e depois a gente abre para perguntas. Então, lógico, como não tem tanta gente, ela faz a apresentação, e aí depois, devagarzinho, se vocês tiverem alguma curiosidade, a gente pode fazer uma coisa mais interativa, tá bom? Então, Judith, welcome to São Paulo, welcome to Brazil. Please, we are going to enjoy your presentation.
Okay, thank you. All right, hi. Good morning. Everybody okay with my English? Yeah, because you would not be okay with my Portuguese. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about virtual reality and serious games. The work that we have done in my lab really spans the range of development of the technologies, then adapting existing technologies for applications. And then we've been very interested in actually doing some knowledge translation, taking the information that we're learning from the research and actually helping clinicians use that information in practice. And then the last piece that we've been spending time on is on technology transfer. So one of the problems that we have in this area is that a lot of us build environments, test them, validate them, show that they work, and then you can't use them because they're not commercially available, and so essentially they die in the lab. So there's really a whole bunch of different things that we've been interested in. Today I'm going to talk about some of them, and maybe during the questions, if I don't get to all these topics, we can get to them. So what I had sort of outlined for today was what you see on the left-hand side, and we may get to all of it, we may not get to all of it. I might skip some in the interest of time, but here we go. As I'm talking, some of the work that I'm going to talk about is actually the work that we've done in our lab, so I'll present some data from the Cochrane Review. I'm going to describe one of the very first systems that we built. Then I'm going to talk about how we've adapted some games for fitness. And then finally, I will share a little bit about how we're taking existing exercise equipment and trying to couple it with virtual environments. And I probably will skip this last thing, which is the latest study we just presented on energy expenditure with video games. So I think everybody in this room knows what virtual reality is, so I don't need to define it for you. But I think what we can see is that the technologies for presenting the virtual environments have been optimized. I think what's of interest to us in physical medicine and rehabilitation is the interactivity. The fact that we can now build interfaces so that we can either manipulate our hands or our feet or total body acquisition with markerless systems to be able to use movement as the tool to interact with the virtual environment. Now, it's important to realize that VR has been around for a very long time. For those of us in rehab, it really came to us from psychology and the work that was done with phobias. And also the work that was done with burn patients. So one of the very first environments that was built for rehabilitation was Snow World by Hunter Hoffman at University of Washington in Seattle. And that was a cooling environment. It was white. And so patients who had burns tolerated when they did the dressings on them much better because they were seeing an environment that was soothing and cooling. Obviously, we've since taken those technologies and adapted them for physical rehabilitation, which is the area that I primarily work in. But it's important to note that you can't separate the physical from the cognitive. So they're really complex rehab problems. And what you can see is this timeline isn't even current anymore. The technology just keeps iterating. And that's one of the biggest problems that we have from a research perspective. We get new technology all the time, and we can't keep up in terms of being able to do research with that technology. So just a couple of very basic definitions. One of the things we're interested when we build virtual environments is that the user feels in the environment, i.e. present, and then also what we call immersion. And immersion, as you can see from your left to right, goes from highly immersive to semi-immersive. And people believe somehow that the greater the immersion, the better the effect in the environment. That's not really the case for rehabilitation, and that's going to be something that I'll chat about in a moment. But you can see all the way on the left with the head-mounted display, it's fully immersive because everything else in the real world is blocked out. Here in the center, you have a semi-immersive environment that's highly immersive with rear projections on the floor, on the screen, but you could still look down and orient yourself in the virtual environment by looking at your feet. And here, obviously, is the least immersive environment. And what you'll see is that a lot of rehab applications are in 2D. They're not even in 3D. This is in 3D because he has special glasses, but sometimes the applications are done without any enhancement of glasses. One of the biggest problems with immersion is that people with neurologic conditions get sick. There's something called simulator sickness. So some of our patients can't even tolerate having head-mounted displays, and that ends up being one of the limitations that we have to deal with. Now, when VR came to rehab as a promise, a lot of the things that people were excited about was that we could build virtual environments that could be manipulated for therapy purposes in a safe way, and at the same time, because we're measuring the motor behavior, we can give people very specific feedback and further shape the responses. And as it turns out, this paper done, now 15 years ago by Skip Rizzo at USC has proven mostly to be true, and I'm going to show you some data to support that. Now, just from a background standpoint, when I talk about virtual environments, I'm talking about environments that are informed by neuroscience and by movement science. And so those are the environments that we build. We take basically concepts like enriched environments. We're building enriched environments, promote neuroplasticity. And then we take ideas from motor learning that have been tested in the real world, and we embed them in the virtual environments. That's different than serious games. People sometimes lump they put video games inside virtual reality. For my talk, I'm going to call them serious games. And essentially, in our world, these were the games that were designed for recreation, but we have adapted them for rehabilitation. And obviously, what's so appealing about them is that they're low cost, easily available, and they can sense motion. One of the limitations is that the games aren't designed for patients with specific health conditions, and I'll address how us and several other groups have dealt with that. What we get from games that's a little bit different than we get from virtual environments is we get fun. You know, those of us in rehab and in science aren't fun, but people in video games, they actually do know how to have fun. So we get from them things like rewards and challenges and levels and narratives, and you can go on a quest. So now we can take some ideas from neuroscience and from motor learning, and we can take ideas from gaming and hopefully try to combine everything to build engaging environments that'll allow people to train at a high enough intensity to get a behavioral response. So I'm going to actually start with some of the evidence, all right? And so we've been involved in the first, second, and third iteration of the Cochrane Review, which is an effort that's been led by colleagues in New Zealand. And here's the bottom line. When you look at upper limb function, you can see a small but positive effect favoring VR. And some of the things that people have done, which are interesting, and I'll apologize in advance because not all my videos are running on this projected device that you guys have here. So what you see here on your left is a haptic master, which is a $100,000 robotic arm that gives you the feeling of gravity as you're moving. And the simulation to the right of that is somebody placing an object in a cup. And on the bottom left-hand side, you can see what the trajectory of the movement looks like before VR training. And you can see that as the person approaches the top of the shelf, there's more error and placement about knowing where to put the cup in space. And after training, the trajectory becomes smooth. because one of the problems that we have in VR, particularly with upper limb use, is giving the sensory component of the movement, and that's so important for upper extremity manipulation. In this simulation, on the left-hand side is a piano where they're working on individuation, accessing each individual finger. And so the color of the finger matches the color of the key, and when you successfully deplete the key, you get feedback about the performance on the task. You're hearing, none of these things have audio for today, but the music obviously accompanies it and enforces it. Now, in contrast to upper limb use, what we see with walking recovery and stroke is that there isn't as much research, and the research doesn't yet reach, at least with the criteria that we used in the Cochrane, evidence to show that it favors VR. I'm going to talk a little bit about one of the studies that's included here, which is our work, to give you an idea of sort of how that field has evolved. So we developed the Rutgers Ankle Rehabilitation System in conjunction with Greg Berdea. And this project basically took 9 years. So the reason it took so long is that we were very early in the field figuring out how to interface virtual environments with robotics. So we started with a 6 degree of freedom Stewart platform that was instrumented with linear potentiometers and a force transducer. And here you can see with a flock of birds, the very early attempts to validate the measurement properties of the system. And you see a very, very simple simulation. This simulation was just intended to track the movement of people who had ankle sprains. So if you had an ankle sprain, we could augment how much movement you did, and we could give you the sense of moving more than you did. I don't know how much you know about the ankle, but the ankle does not move a lot. So when you have an ankle sprain and you only move 1 degree, you don't perceive that you're moving well. So what you can do in VR is that you can obviously change the gain of the movement and augment that response. So this very, very simple simulation actually helped people move better. And it was the beginning of just try to test the proof of concept. And here's just some data to show that, in fact, when you look at people who have an ankle sprain, you can see that compared to their less affected leg, the ability to generate force is much less. So we validated some of the basic properties about the movement, and then we actually took the device, and again, you can't hear the simulation, and we brought it into a working physical therapy clinic, and we worked with patients to try to see, could they map the movement of their ankle to the movement of a plane that could go into yaw, pitch, and roll, mapped to the movements of the physiological movements of the ankle. And this is a very simple simulation in which you are moving through this environment with simply of the goal of having accuracy of your movements. When you get feedback visually, auditorily, and haptically. The platform is instrumented in a way that allows you to receive a highly technical thing we call jolts. When you banged into the target, your foot got pushed back. And so we use this simulation with a variety of patients in a working clinic. And essentially, we had to bring ice packs and put it on the generator because we weren't used to running the generator all day in a clinic. You know, when you do something in the lab, you run it for a little while and then you stop. But in the real clinic, we had patients coming every hour, and by the end of the day, we had to put like tons of ice packs on our generator because our generator was overheating. Because this is a pneumatic. This is a pneumatic device. This is just a little bit of data. We had one person with a stroke come in, and what we saw, which we didn't expect, in the red with his affected leg and in the green with his unaffected, is that just in the short period of 2 weeks, his ability to generate power with his affected ankle really increased. But more importantly to us, he was able to walk farther and faster. So we became quite interested in how can we take this information and augment it. So now we built two platforms, and unfortunately the video is not playing on the simulation, but I'm going to tell you a little bit about how we enhance the simulation. The simulation now has an environment that changes. So as you're navigating the plane, the sky becomes dark, there's a storm, the platform starts to vibrate, and you're getting all this added sensory input to your foot. The targets are placed either close together or far apart. They're either coming at you quickly. You can either see 16 or they're either completely eliminated. So with a very simple simulation, we can actually modify the way you do activity and do do a variety of exercises. And first we had to demonstrate that in fact people could learn to do the simulation. So on the left-hand side you see people, we had two, you know what, I'm not going to tell you the details of it. We validated these data. And the other thing, that, and here we validated that actually having sensory input can help you feel your leg better. One of the deficits that people post-stroke have is that they can't feel their lower extremity very well. So here we have somebody who couldn't feel their lower extremity very well, who had some perceptual problems, but because the platform augmented the sensation, what you see in the linear regression in the yellow is higher than the linear regression in the blue, showing that they were actually better, more accurate when we gave them sensory input. So we were able to modulate sensory input for this particular participant. But essentially, with the different components that I explained to you about how we could manipulate the complexity in the environment, we can create a therapeutic intervention. And here you see somebody with a bird's eye view doing the work. And what you'll notice on the left is that he's actually using his whole body to try to move the plane. But as he gets better and has better control of his ankle, he's completely able to sit and move his ankle in isolation. And so we did a randomized controlled trial to try to understand what's going on here. Is it this little fancy robot that allows you to do all these repetitions, or is it the robot coupled with the virtual environment? So we had a therapist with the robot doing exactly the same thing as what we did with the virtual environment. And what we found in orange is that, oh, sorry, this is not a pointer. What we found in orange is that the group that used the robot alone with the clinician didn't do as well as the robot with the virtual environment. This is walking speed, and this is endurance for walking. And what you see is that after 12 sessions of training, the gains are retained. They're better at post, and they're also retained at follow-up. So we looked at these people not only with these clinical tests, we actually instrumented them with an activity monitor and followed them in the community 1 week before the training and 1 week after the training. And essentially what you see here is that the gains that you see measured clinically transferred to improvements in the real world of walking, which is actually a really important piece of the data. And the last piece of data that I'll show you are the kinetics that we did with an instrumented gait analysis. So all of these subjects had a full motion capture gait assessment, and what you see here on this slide is the ground reaction force during push-off and walking. So in the robot VR group on the top, you can see that at the key moment of walking, they're able to generate more force through the ankle, and that's one of the reasons why they're walking faster and walking farther. Now, what's a little bit counterintuitive is that we train people in sitting to walk better, all right? I just want you to sort of store that in your mind because that's not what you might have expected. But it was the beginning of us being able to understand how useful coupling virtual environments is with motor rehabilitation. And Nat Mirelman, who was a PhD student in my lab, was the one who took the lead on this study. Now, I won't go over this, but what I want to explain is that I showed you the Cochrane slide about walking not having a positive effect for virtual reality. If you look at other systematic reviews, and here we synthesized all the other systematic reviews in a paper, what you find is a small but positive effect favoring VR when it comes to gait speed, and similarly when you're looking at balance. So sometimes these Cochrane reviews, listen, I wrote one, aren't the definitive thing to tell you whether or not there's a small or positive benefit for what we're seeing. Now, in that Cochrane, in the Cochrane review, one of the other studies that's included, I showed you a study with a highly sophisticated robotic device. Now I want to show you something with an active video game. This is work by my colleague Roberto Lorenz at the University of Valencia. And what he did is that he used the Kinect to track people's walking and movement and developed a couple of mini games for the Kinect that do simple balance activities. And he compared them training in the clinic to training at home. And essentially what he was able to demonstrate, this is called plastilinas. Basically you're stepping on them and you're just following that information. Here you're shifting your weight to go around in a circle. The other two games are shifting your center of mass and controlling the direction of a ball, and then this bottom one is, as Simon says. So you have memory and cognition. Not very complicated games, but now you're looking at something that could be implemented in somebody's home. So the beauty of this is the simplification and the fact that you can buy the Kinect. The problem with this is he built the games, and right now his university is not allowing him to share the games. That's how it goes. This is one of our problems. For ADLs, we have consistently in all three Cochranes seen a positive small effect for VR. So there is literature to support the use of VR, but how are people actually using it? We did a survey in the United States, and there were 500 respondents, and basically what we found was this is what people are using. So there's a lot of things developed in VR, but mostly people are using off-the-shelf commercial games. And when you see what they're using it for and what patients they're using it for, you can see that there's a variety of patients. A lot of them are neuro patients, and the activities tend to be balance, fitness activities, and some upper limb activities. But you can see that people are really beginning to think about them as tools to combine cognitive and motor training. This, the study we did was compared to work that was done in Canada, and you'll see that it's very, very similar in Canada as it is in the US. We really should do it in Brazil. In Brazil, there's a ton of people using VR in a clinical setting. And the reason that we were interested in doing this stuff is that we want to build resources for clinicians so that clinicians can do a better job using these games in therapy. And this just talks a little bit more about the details about that. So given that people are using these games, we wanted to understand what's in these games. So for a summer, I had 5 students playing every single Wii and Wii Sports game, and we analyzed what's inside these games. And so this is a big football player discovering he's not that coordinated. When we analyzed these games, what we found was that a big part of what they contained was what we call knowledge of results. They gave you information on how well you were doing the game, which encourages you to play the game more, which makes sense from a gamification standpoint. What they didn't do is give you a lot of information on the quality of the movement, how well you were playing the game. So from a therapeutic standpoint, that becomes a challenge, right? Because in our world of physical medicine and rehabilitation, we're not interested just in getting you to move more. We want you to move efficiently and effectively. So when a therapist uses these games, they need to couple their expertise with whatever the game is doing, and they might have to adapt the games. So given that that's the case, we've been trying to figure out, can I use video games for things that they were not designed for? And we asked the question, could we use them for fitness and wellness? Now, video games have been used with sedentary, obese young people, and they've shown that you can increase your energy expenditure when you do it. We wanted to know, can we bring that information and use it for persons with stroke? So we designed a study where we compared using Wii versus using the Kinect, and using them in different positions, and using them with different games. And again, the motivation for this was how could a clinician take this information and apply it in practice? So Michal Kafri, who was a postdoc in my lab, took the lead on this study. And you can see we have a cart from the last century. I mean, this is as low tech as you could be with your VR. I mean, I can't even believe how old this TV is. And so here we have a patient with using a portable metabolic cart. And so we're able to measure their VO2 while they're exercising, and collect information on their energy expenditure as well as on their movement performance. And you can see this person had a stroke. I don't know if you can tell by looking at him which is his stroke affected side. Can you guys tell from looking? Is it the right hand or the left hand that's more affected by the stroke? It's the left, all right? And so we put the nunchuck in the left because the nunchuck is less important for movement detection than the controller. And so yeah, that's a simple thing that you need to think about when you adapt it. And yes, he's more affected on the left side. And so this is what we found. We found that when we compared persons with stroke to sedentary older adults that were age matched, they exercised at a much lower intensity. So the dark bars are the person's post-stroke, and the banded lines are what would be considered moderate exercise intensity. So what you see is that people barely achieve moderate exercise intensity with these video games compared to people that are able-bodied. And so what this means from an application to rehabilitation standpoint is you probably can't use them for fitness. You have to be exercising in the high intensity band, but you could use them for wellness. But take a look here, you can see walking. Walking gives you a very similar result, right? So now you have to decide, is my patient gonna do it if he does a video game, or will my patient just prefer to take a walk and probably get a similar benefit? But at least now you can make your choice with information. Now what's interesting is that when you look at the percent of max heart rate, people are actually exercising at closer intensity between the older adults. So from a cardiovascular standpoint, we're actually seeing a pretty decent effect for using these video games. Now, this is work done by others where they showed that training over time improves your oxygen consumption using the Connect dance game. Not only does it improve your VO2 consumption, but it also improves the repetitions, so you become more active. So, and this is another study showing that when you add video games, people just do more movement. This is work by Debbie Rand. And in the US, they conducted a study to see what are people using for aerobic training in persons with stroke, and we're starting to see that, in fact, people are reporting using this in clinic. So this is one piece of this technology that's actually transferring into the real world of practice. So because of the challenges with taking Roberto's games and having somebody use them, we decided we would develop some games and see how effective they are compared to the off-the-shelf game. So these are the ones I'm going to skip. I'm not going to like blah, blah, blah you. Exercise is important, blah, blah, blah. All right? So we did a study where we compared two games that we developed. The important thing here is that when you play a video game, it can be self-paced, meaning the game will go as fast as you can go, or it can be game-paced, meaning you have to keep up with the game. The problem with game-paced is that a lot of our patients can't keep up with the game. And so many of these off-the-shelf games, they can't play at all. So we wanted to take a look at game-paced and self-paced and try to compare them to off-the-shelf games like the Connect or the standard of care. So we did a lot of stuff to do that. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the game-paced first. On the left-hand side, you see a game called the Connect Light Race game. And here's a patient with a stroke actually doing the game. This looks very different than what you're used to seeing somebody playing a video game, right? But essentially, he has to keep pace with the presentation of the target on the screen. And he gets some feedback when he hits the target correctly. The target is going to turn green and he's going to get some information. And then in between, because these games are short, we had to put in another activity to reset the game. And so the person is just marching in place in order to reset the game. And you can see that here too, he's wearing the metabolic, he's wearing the mask so that we can collect VO2, and we're looking at a variety of other measures. Now, here's the game that we designed. It's also not very complicated, and it's essentially randomly presenting targets that he has to step on that are going to change color. And again, we don't have audio here. And so he's following these patterns, and he's doing that for a minute. And then when that minute is over, he's going to switch, and he's going to start doing a kicking game in order to have the two conditions be comparable. I'll wait for you to see the kicking game in just a moment. This is a person who had a stroke probably 8 or 9 years ago and is still trying to do some rehab. So here is the kicking game, and basically it's more like a soccer drill where you'd have to, I'm in Brazil, I don't have to tell you people, so where you'd have to like tap the ball, like, you know, to do like some ball control with the soccer game. So this is just explaining to you how we did the metabolic data analysis and our participants. And essentially, here's what we found. Okay, we found that when you look at these data, they're all going to be the same way. The affected leg is in blue. The unaffected leg is in green. The game that we designed is on the left, and the off-the-shelf game is on the right. So you can see that They did a lot more exercise with the off-the-shelf game, but they were much more accurate with our game. So there was a speed-accuracy trade-off. When you look at the total number of repetitions, the repetitions were quite similar when they were marching, but not so similar when they were stepping. And here's the thing. The metabolic intensity was greater with an off-the-shelf game than with our game, all right? And the flip of it is that they enjoyed our game better. So what do we have? We have that you can have greater intensity with the Connect game that you buy, but it's at the expense of them enjoying it, and it's at the expense of them being accurate. So the story is that probably there's some benefit for going to the store and getting an off-the-shelf game, but it's probably better that we're building our own games to address these problems. And I'm not going to go over this because it's too long, but basically there's another part of this study that I'll just scroll through. And the whole purpose of this study was to be able to look at not only the movement intensity, but the kinematics. And essentially the kinematics are better when you can customize your game. Bum, 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 bum. Okay, so I'm going to switch gears a little bit, and I'm going to talk about probably the largest clinical trial that's been done using virtual reality. And this is done with persons with stroke. This work was done by my former PhD student, Anat Mirelman, and a collaboration of people all over Europe. And essentially, you can see there's a pretty simple 2D environment. People are walking on a treadmill over virtual obstacles, and they have to make some decisions about where to navigate their path as they're walking through these obstacles. And you can see that the number of participants is really high. And they're comparing people with PD to older adults with falls and people with MCI. And it's a similar design to the ankle one I showed you. One group is doing exercise on the treadmill. The other group is doing exercise on the treadmill, going through a variety of environments. And so this, and what they found was that after 6 months of training, the people that did the treadmill plus the VR have a much lower incidence of falls, right? So training with these virtual obstacles in a relatively simple environment reduces the falls. It also has effects on gait variability and their ability to negotiate obstacles. And on top of it, the people who did the VR work improved cognitively. So now we have cognitive improvements, we have motor improvements, and we have quality of life improvements. So they also followed and looked at their health-related quality of life at the different time points. And in the yellow, you can see that regardless of, except for at baseline, the quality of life improves. So this is a study that exhaustively showed motor, cognitive, and quality of life improvements using a simple 2D virtual environment. And they've also, and this actually, Imbal Meidan also did her PhD in my lab, and she did the neuroimaging study to actually show that there were brain changes that could explain what was occurring as a result of this study. So that study is, as I said, probably the largest study using a semi-immersive environment in persons with Parkinson's. Other really cool things that are happening with Parkinson's is that they are modeling freezing of gait. Freezing of gait is a problem that people with Parkinson's have where they lose their ability to move and they freeze. And it's very debilitating. And so what Gomez Jordana is doing in their work is that they're actually figuring out how to build a simple environment so that you could reproduce freezing and you could help people overcome the problem. Because one of the biggest challenges with freezing of gait is you don't know when it's going to happen. So it's a very simple environment. This is now done with a head-mounted display. They're going through a door. They actually mistakenly put two narrow doors. This should really be a wider door. This is supposed to be a wide door. A narrow door, a door opening, is one of the known stimuli that produces freezing of gait. So what they did in this study is basically they had you walk in an open corridor with a wide door and now a narrow door. It's just that they have two narrow doors as their example. And what they found was that they could very reliably reproduce freezing of gait. So in blue is the healthy controls, in red is the people with PD, and in green is the people that have Parkinson's and are freezers. And you can see that that as the door gets smaller, their step length gets smaller, and the graph on the top left. And they showed it across a variety of things. So it's kind of nice if you could robustly reproduce a problem, you might be able to study it better. And the reason I show this to you is also that we're going from a semi-immersive environment displayed on a computer screen, which is basically running a Kinect and doing color detection of your feet, to now not a complicated environment, but doing it in a highly immersive HMD. We have also taken a look at coupling exercise equipment with a bicycle with persons with Parkinson's. So one of the biggest problems people with Parkinson's have is that they're slow at their movement. It's called Brady Kinesia. And here we built an environment to try to see if we could modulate how fast they could cycle by giving them visual, auditory cues, which we know work in the real world, and we wanted to see if they worked in the virtual world. And here, the reason for this slide is that it's not a trivial thing to build a virtual environment and build it correctly. So there's a fair amount of science that's shown what you need to do to create the experience of optic flow. So you need to have contrast, you need to have texture, you need to have certain kinds of lighting. So it's not, the problem when you go buy something out of the store is it's not going to have that. So there's still a lot of value in building your own environments. And also one of the key things for the sense of navigation and flow is that objects have to be scaled to the real world. So you have to have a correspondence for people to really be able to interact with the environment. So this is an environment that's built from a first-person perspective. So I'm sitting on my bike and I'm looking out at the environment instead of a third-person perspective. And this was the setup for this study. This work was done by Rose Gallagher, who was a PhD student in my lab. And it's very simply projected onto the wall. And there's a variety of blocks in which the data were acquired. We baselined each block, so because what happens is when people come into the lab, after they're cycling, they start to get faster. So for each condition, we had to re-baseline their blocks. And we also acquired, I guess the video's not playing, we also acquired kinematics to look at their kinematics. This is just a little bit of the details of how people were screened. And here you have the auditory condition. So on the left-hand side, what you see is just a plain road. Please notice that there's no markers on the road. It's just a straight road. And then on the right-hand side, we have no audio. What you hear is a metronome going 20% faster than baseline. And so what we want to see is if they can adjust their speed to go 20% faster than baseline. All right? So what happens in this block is that we show them baseline, where they're cycling without a virtual environment. Then we add auditory cues, where they're just listening to the cues. And then we add the virtual environment without the visual cues, the auditory cues, and then we combine them. So, and what you see on the left-hand side is that people responded. And people were able to increase their cycling speed almost 20%. So they increased it by 18%. And they did better when you combine the two pieces of information. And the responses were similar when we compared it to older adults. Now for the visual cues, we put road markers. And here you're going to see them at their regular speed. And then on the right-hand side, essentially, they're presented at 20% faster. And what you tell participants is to look out at the horizon. And you can also then say to them, pay attention to the markers. So those are two separate conditions. And essentially what we found was people could increase their cycling speed, people with Parkinson's, but they did the best when you said, look at the markers. You had to actually direct their attention to that, which is a little bit different from older adults. Older adults didn't need that to have that response. But the best response we got was with feedback. And so here, the markers turn pink when you're cycling at 20% faster, plus or minus 3, so that you have a bandwidth. So this is a very simple simulation. We just have an RPM counter that's tracking the crank, and that's the only input into the virtual environment, as opposed to some of the other simulations that are much more complicated. Now, right here in this, and what we found was essentially people responded to the feedback extremely well. They actually overshot it. They worked at a higher intensity. And because of that, we just got funded by NIH. We're now doing a study where we're comparing what do people with Parkinson's like better? The environment presented on the screen or wearing a head-mounted display? Doing the exercise continuously or doing it intermittently? Now we're combining high-intensity training with continuous exercise. And once we figure that out, we'll do a training study to see if people can get better with this simple application of the technology. So I had just wanted to show you a little bit about what's going on in Parkinson's, just because it's another big area of work. And I'm coming back to stroke now. And you can see that a lot of what I talked about hasn't been with fully immersive environments. We are just now starting to see the research on fully immersive environments come into the fore. So even though the HTC Vive came out a few years ago, and the Oculus, the first generation of the Oculus was horrible, you got really sick using it, but the second generation of the Oculus is quite good. Here you see an application for upper limb use by people at Columbia, and they're implementing things that we do in the real world of practice. So on the left-hand side, it's mirror therapy done in VR, and on the right-hand side is just simple exercises and some stacking movements. And essentially, they're showing that people with stroke can tolerate the head-mounted display and can actually improve their upper limb use. And then the last thing I'll show you is probably the latest stuff that people are beginning to play with is AR. So now, people are using the Leap motion sensor, and they're using AR headsets or the Kinect to track movements. So the setups are becoming simpler. As you can see over here on the left-hand side, they have a Leap motion sensor, and then they have the AR headset on top of it. And this is work out of a group in Holland, and they're beginning to show that it's feasible for persons with stroke to actually have the simulation presented more as an AR rather than a VR, so that you can interact with real-world objects while at the same time interact with virtual objects. So what I'll say is that it's taken a while for us to show that this stuff works. We're still not 100% there with being able to have these things used by people, but we keep trying to keep up from a research standpoint with the ongoing development of the technology, and there's always going to be that lag. And so that's a really quick and dirty talk. Could talk in a lot more detail about each individual things that we've done, and I didn't really talk a lot about some of the resources that we've designed, but we're just one of many groups in the field that are trying to make sense of this technology for rehabilitation. And obviously, I work with a lot of different people in a lot of parts of the world, and some of the work I've presented here has been collaboratively done with some of my colleagues that I'd like to acknowledge. Okay, that's it. Did I talk too long? Okay? All right.
So we can open for some questions.
Oh, I have to keep this. All right.
So we can open for some questions. Someone would like to ask something? No?
It was so clear.
Yes, it is.
Or not clear at all.
No, it was so clear. Judy, tell me something. You just finished with AR, augmented reality. And if you talk about augmented reality and virtual reality, you said something that maybe AR is going to be better than virtual reality.
Did I say that?
You said
I don't know
it's
that.
going to be easier, I mean, or it's going to be the
It's just
future.
gonna be-
The question is,
Well,
which one you think is better for invest, AR or VR?
To invest?
Yes, for the future. I mean, for a
Well,
company as well.
if you
For a
ask the
company as
engineer in
well.
my lab, he's been dying for us to do some AR simulations. He's like, when are we doing AR? And I'm like, we have to finish the VR stuff because it's not done. But look, it's a never-ending cycle. Like my colleague came into my lab the other day. He goes, I'm getting a HoloLens, Judy. We're going to start doing some, but now it's going to take us a year to build that. And, so I don't know what the answer is. I think, well, to be honest with you, I think.
So that's a good question.
I think, here's what I think. The answer is that each of these technologies has its own use and application for different patient populations and for different reasons. And in the end, the thing that'll be most user-friendly and most reasonably priced and also efficacious is what's going to be used. Do you know what I mean?
Yet sometimes I think that AR could be a first step to go forward to a VR environment in the future.
Maybe.
You know what I mean?
But
Because
some people
AR,
might
you can have both. You
But
can have the real environment.
the challenge of me being able to separate what's the augmented piece from the real piece might be very confusing for me if I've had a stroke, right? So I think it always depends on what are the perceptual and cognitive abilities of the person you're working with before you pick it. I can tell you that we've been testing using the simulation with a head-mounted display, and people are telling us that they don't like it because they get hot. So they're exercising on the bike, and so, you know, the environment is delicious and you're in there, but you're like all sweaty with the head-mounted display. So these are not even things you expect, right? So literally, some people have said, I like the projected environment because I got hot and I got so uncomfortable. And we only had them cycling for 8-minute bouts. Now imagine if I want to do a real workout, right? So maybe the HoloLens will be a little bit more comfortable than using the HTC Vive, right?
Okay.
So
I know what you mean. I know.
You know what
Yep.
I mean. I'm not
Yep.
going to answer one is better than the other. It always depends,
I
the
know,
application.
I know.
Sorry, I'd like to say in Portuguese to you and you translate. Because my question is very hard.
He's going to ask in Portuguese.
I heard that the question is hard,
It's
so
hard,
I'm glad I'm
yes.
sitting down.
Hard for me.
No, okay.
Ok. Eu tive problema do ombro, fiz a... Não.
Sí, pero yo le entiendo en portugués, ¿eh?
Fiz
Okay.
a operação e quando eu vou aplicar os exercícios...
Marquinhos, eles estão pedindo para você.
Okay.
Tive o problema no ombro e quando eu fui aplicar as atividades da físio em casa, não ficava claro para mim até onde eu podia ir. E outro problema que nós temos em São Paulo é de ir até a clínica.
Yeah, porque el tráfico es
Exato.
terrible en Sao Paulo.
E eu vi uma série de questões e
No rehab.
estando na clínica pessoas com mais restrições, então há uma perspectiva para esses sistemas serem integrados, por exemplo, para o meu caso, que eu comecei a fazer atividades além do que eu podia pós-cirúrgico,
Claro.
ou, do outro lado, para essas pessoas, para evitar o tráfico e tudo mais.
Sim.
Como está essa perspectiva?
Pero yo no, sorry, I didn't talk about telerehab at all, but quite a few groups, including our own, have demonstrated that you can do these things with telerehab, right? And now the coupling of those two is becoming much easier because in the United States they changed the privacy requirements, or the privacy requirements have been met. One of the biggest barriers, so we did telerehab 15 years ago, but we couldn't use it in the real world because of the privacy rules. Now the United States has changed the rules so that you can do a lot of this remotely, right? And so you have the access issue removed, and you have the, I'm doing my home exercise program and I don't understand what's going on. So either the technology is getting better so that when you're doing your shoulder exercise, you know that you're in the right plane and that you've reached the right excursion, right? So you can get some information on the kinematics of your movement, or you can have the clinician remotely supervise you, or the clinician can look at your traces and then can say, oh, wow, something's not right here, we need to have a call, let me give you some more instruction. So I think all of those models are coming in. And now, I mean, I didn't talk a lot about this, but with the wearable technology, all of that's going to get even easier. So what you have is you have all of the stuff with the wearables really taking off. You have all the AR, VR stuff, and then you have the telerehab, and they're all just going to combine to simplify it. But you know, the thing is, somebody has to put them together and demonstrate it and make it feasible. There are now more companies. So I didn't talk a lot about that, but I took more of a research perspective for my talk, but obviously the other piece of it is partnering with industry so that these things can be actually made and be products and people can buy them. So when you have that, you have to just make sure that industry is doing the work carefully and well, they have other drivers for their, and so I think if we can build really good partnerships, that's when a lot of this stuff is going to become much more ubiquitous, used by a lot of people. Does that make sense? Yes. Yeah. Thank you for that question. Yeah.
And what do you think about the relationship between therapists, the engineer, and game developers and companies? Do you think that that's the gap to provide a better rehabilitation system using virtual reality?
Yeah,
What do you think?
You have to have all those people in the game, really. So I didn't talk about the Open Rehab Initiative, but it's we built with Roberto and Sergi an online platform where we're sharing some of our simulations, so people can just get them for free. So if you're interested in some of our games, you can get them there. I didn't talk about that, but I can talk about that at another time. But what we're seeing more and more are these partnerships, where realistically, the researchers don't necessarily always have the skill set, or if they do, they don't have the time to develop it efficiently. So I didn't show you one of our simulations that we had developed for us. Some we do ourselves, some we have others develop for us. So the truth is, it's a very complex ecosystem. You need game designers, you need animators, you need people who can do the storyline, and then you need the clinician scientists and engineers to interface all of the sensors and so if it's done right, I think and then you would need the patients. You would need somebody who has the health condition, who can tell you what they think is needed from their perspective. It's happening. At least there are now funding mechanisms for those partnerships where there weren't before.
Okay.
Aló, ¿usted entiende español?
Sí, yo entiendo español.
Te voy a hacer la pregunta en español, que me es
¿Usted
más
es
fácil que en
argentino?
inglés. No, soy brasileño, pero nací en Argentina.
Sí, porque el
pero fue
acento.
un accidente. Mi familia tuvo la feliz idea de venir a Brasil.
Ah, ok.
Yo quería, si usted puede, hablar un poco de la relación entre la realidad virtual, los computadores y la motivación.
Sí.
Porque en términos de rehabilitación hay siempre una motivación grande,
Claro,
para curar, para recuperar movimiento. Pero cuando usted habla en calidad de vida, no sé, obesos, sedentarios, no sé qué, hay un problema muy grande de motivación. Normalmente las personas tienen acceso a lo que podría mejorar su calidad de vida, pero no lo usan, ¿no? Entonces, la realidad virtual tendría un impacto positivo, podría tener un impacto positivo en ese sentido.
sí, bueno, eso es la promesa, ¿no? Esa es una de las motivaciones para usar la realidad virtual, ¿verdad? Que ahora vas a tener ejercicios que no son tan aburridos, ¿no? Tienes que hacer 100 repeticiones de algo, pero pues es tan aburrido hacer eso. Pero, por ejemplo, alguien diseñó una simulación muy simpática que tenía Ninja Warriors, y los niños con cerebral palsy tenían que practicar un movimiento muy sencillo del tobillo, pero en un grupo lo hicieron nada más moviendo los tobillos, y en el otro grupo tenían una simulación que creo que la hicieron con el PlayStation o Gesture Tech, y era una pagoda, y tenían ninjas, y dependiendo de qué tanto movían la simulación, the ninja llegaba a diferentes niveles de la pagoda. Muy sencilla, pero fue uno de los ejemplos donde demostraron que la motivación y la cantidad de actividad fue más grande. En lo que yo presenté aquí con nuestros juegos, les gustó más los juegos nuestros, porque no eran tan interesantes, pero estaban calibrados a su nivel. Esa es otra de las cuestiones. Sabemos que entre 70 y 80% de suceso en una actividad te va a mantener suficientemente motivado para seguir haciéndolo, pero no es tan difícil que no lo vas a querer hacer. Entonces, tenemos muchos de nosotros algoritmos que están tratando de adaptarse a los parámetros del movimiento para que se mantenga ese 70 o 80% de suceso en el juego. Entonces, sí, eso es algo muy importante, aunque le platico que es una de esas cosas que muchos decimos, lo estamos haciendo por la motivación, pero no necesariamente lo estamos estudiando muy específicamente. Pero en muchos estudios lo que hacen ahora es que tienen un cuestionario de motivation, the Intrinsic Motivation Inventory, para poder decir sí hubo algo de motivación. Lo que pasa es que muchos de los juegos son muy sencillos, y si lo vas a usar sobre mucho tiempo, tienes que, yo creo, poner una historia más interesante en los juegos. Ahí es donde viene el enlace con la gente que desarrolla juegos y que entiende de esas cosas mejor que nosotros los científicos, que somos muy aburridos y pues, ya sabes, ¿no? I want to do good science, you know? What do you mean you're going to have fun? Pero pues aquí te tienes que divertir un poco, ¿no?
Yo trabajé varios años con calidad de vida y la cuestión de la motivación es central. Digo, no se mueve, él no quiere mover o no quiere adelgazar.
Mire, lo que pasa también con estos juegos es que uno tiene la oportunidad de integrar la competencia. A veces hay gente que cuando compite con otros se motivan. O también puede uno integrar colaboración. Hay gente que prefiere colaborar, hay otra gente que prefiere competir. Y eso también se está estudiando. ¿Cuál es la mejor manera de hacer la interacción con los juegos? Y hay otra cosa que no se ha estudiado mucho, que es la interacción social que viene cuando uno está haciendo un juego. Entonces, nosotros hicimos un estudio de un niño que tenía la parálisis cerebral, y un día yo traje a mi hijo, lo traje y le dije, ¿por qué no juegas con él? Y lo que pasó después de esa sesión es que este joven con la parálisis cerebral cambió su estrategia completamente cuando estaba haciendo el boliche. Yo le dije, pero ¿qué hiciste? Me dice, no, pues me fijé que Daniel lo hacía de una manera. Entonces, fue un accidente, ¿verdad? Pero estuvimos viendo que puedes hacer modeling si traes a otras personas, pero también, mira, si tú te llevas este juego y lo juegas con tu nieto, tú vas a querer hacer tus ejercicios más que si vas a hacer unos ejercicios solos. Entonces, creo que hay muchas áreas de la motivación que no se han desarrollado, porque estamos tan preocupados con hacer una tecnología que trabaje, pero todas esas otras preguntas son muy importantes también. Gracias por la pregunta.
Hola, buenos días.
¿Tú también eres
gracias.
español?
Yo soy español.
Tú eres de España. ¡Wow! Vamos. Él estuvo poniendo atención todo el tiempo. Ni una sola vez se fijó en el teléfono. O si se fijó, no lo vi.
Bueno, muchas gracias por su presentación, fue realmente muy interesante. Y yo quería saber cuál era su pensamiento respecto a, hizo un comentario antes sobre que estas tecnologías, ¿no?, cada vez van a ser más baratas, cada vez van a ser más fácilmente usables, ¿no?, por las personas, y me inquietó un poco que no sé si hasta qué punto existe, si es que existe el riesgo de que estas tecnologías puedan llegar a reemplazar, ¿no?, a los profesionales de la fisioterapia o pueda existir un riesgo a que haya reducciones de plantilla y esto, no sé qué piensan.
Pero no, mira, y hay terapeutas que tienen como que miedo a la tecnología por eso mismo, por lo que tú dices, ¿no? Pero la verdad es que para empezar, tú viste como Cochrane, que no es un efecto tan grande que digas, no, pues va a ser mejor que cualquier otra cosa que estemos haciendo. Los pacientes son muy complejos y no todos responden. Va a haber cierto número de pacientes que puedan responder a esta tecnología. Pero aún así necesitas un clínico que pueda hacer la asesoría y la decisión de cuál es la mejor manera de que esta persona mejore. Ahora que la tecnología va a mejorar, mira, nosotros acá desarrollamos ya una batería de pruebas que puedes hacer para ver la capacidad de alguien. Cuando tengas esas y esas puedan dirigir cómo es que vas a hacer la terapia, bueno, entonces ya tienes un poquito más de un problema. Bueno, pero alguien tiene que prender la máquina. No, no es cierto. Pero yo realmente no le tengo miedo a esas cosas. Yo, más que nada, le tengo respeto, ¿no? Y no hay, es tan compleja la rehabilitación de personas que va a ser muchos años antes de que puedas reemplazar toda la sutileza que viene con un profesional que está interactuando contigo y decidiendo lo que tienes. Vas a tener que, no solo puedes medir movimiento, vas a tener que medir emoción, vas a tener que, y yo sé que ya lo estamos haciendo, yo sé que ya hay medidas, pero es tan complejo que no veo al buen terapeuta reemplazado, pero estaría bien reemplazar los terapeutas que no son buenos, porque hay algunos que no son buenos. Pero es muy buena pregunta. Gracias por la pregunta.
Mais alguma? Em alemão, em quê?
Nosotros en la Facultad de Campinas, en la Unicamp, tenemos un grupo muy fuerte de deporte adaptado. Y hay un cierto consenso que pasada la parte de fisioterapia propriamente dicha, en caso de accidentes, ¿no? Intentar aproximar a las personas para deportes adaptados, que es una tradición norteamericana en la realidad.
Yeah.
No, quería oírle un poco su opinión al respecto de esta aproximación entre el trabajo de fisioterapeuta, el trabajo de rehabilitación y la integración en deportes adaptados.
Sí. Bueno, pues está muy relacionado, ¿no? Yo creo que se complica cuando es quién es el que lo hace, ¿no? Pero como que tienen expertise complementario, ¿no? Yo realmente no soy experta en deporte adaptado, pero usted ve que nosotros estamos haciendo muchas aplicaciones para el deporte, porque el ejercicio como exercise is medicine, ¿no? El ejercicio, hay más y más research que está enseñando que el ejercicio es esencial. Y como a nosotros nos interesa la intensidad del ejercicio, lo considero algo terapeuta, ¿no? I have to monitor you, I have to see if you're going to have an adverse response to exercise. I need a certain amount of skill training as a clinician to do that for high intensity training. But at some point, you need to leave the clinician and you need to be able to do it in an adaptive sports environment. You know, I don't know when the handoff is, but I think sometimes you need to validate the safety and the efficacy of what you're doing in the therapeutic world and then pass it over to the adaptive sports world. That would be my best attempt at an answer. Ya ve que me cambié al inglés porque no me sé todas las palabras en español. Adaptive. Sí, porque mucho de lo que nosotros estamos haciendo es ejercicio. Sí, pero a final de cuentas, realmente nosotros hemos dividido todo un poco artificialmente, ¿no? Y se estilaba que, no, pues estabas en computer science o estabas en neurociencias. Bueno, pero sabemos que todo está relacionado, ¿no? Digo, I know how to code, but I'm not a computer scientist, but I can read someone's codes, I can you know what I mean? But I don't have deep expertise, right? But I have to have some knowledge. So I think, creo que los días de estar tan dedicado en una disciplina están cambiando. Hay más y más combinación, ¿no? Ahora no es un departamento de neurociencias y de psicología, ahora están los dos juntos, ¿no? Y ingeniería también está, human factors está junto a computer, porque todo está relacionado, en mi opinión. Especialmente si uno hace ese trabajo, es 100% integrado, ¿no? Y tiene que estar uno en un equipo y respetar que cada uno del equipo contribuye algo de valor. Y tú me preguntabas eso, digo, ese es un problema, ¿no? Hablamos idiomas diferentes, tenemos entrenamiento diferente y también a veces nosotros creemos que nosotros somos mejores que los otros y pues ese tipo de cosas pues no hay buen equipo, ¿no? En mi equipo todos somos iguales, todo el mundo contribuye, todo el mundo tiene su expertise, pero pues a final de cuentas te tienes que llevar bien para poder hacer algo de valor. Bueno, ya me puse un poco filosófica, pero bueno. Es lo que pasa cuando hablo en español. I would never have said that in English, but Bueno, Carlos told me nobody was coming, so I'm glad some people came.
Alô. Mais alguma pergunta, gente? Não? Tá ótimo. Eu queria agradecer muito a sua presença, Judite, foi muito importante a sua vinda. Aceito o convite, ter vindo até o Brasil, ter feito essa palestra muito interessante para nós. Eu queria só falar que é uma tentativa, além de trazer a Judite para cá para fazer uma palestra, acho que uma coisa importante também são futuras parcerias. A ideia, na verdade, é daqui para frente a gente fazer uma parceria, inclusive para utilizar os jogos delas aqui no Brasil, para nós fazermos novas pesquisas, futuras publicações, e justamente a ideia é fazer crescer o trabalho com realidade virtual, fazer crescer o trabalho com tecnologia, e lógico, a Universidade de São Paulo, com todas as dificuldades que a gente tem no nosso país, ter uma parceria com os Estados Unidos, com a Judite, é uma coisa muito importante. Tá? Então, Judite, de novo, thank you very much for everything. You are really a kindly person. Thank you very much for all the speech. It was really important. Marquinhos, você precisa...
I talked about like this much of what we did, and it was very simple. I hope I haven't offended anybody. I could talk in more detail and more technically.
But you went straight to the point. I think that was a really good speech. Tudo bem? Então a gente finaliza. Acredito que formalmente seja essa forma que se proceda aqui. E, gente, muito obrigado pela participação. E, de novo, thank you very much, Judith, for everything.